Hey guys, so if you are having trouble finding evidence or if you would like additional support with that as you read through, this video is for you. In this video, I'm going to read these notes out loud and I'm going to show you some things that you can highlight for examples of how the founding fathers were acting like heroes and examples where they were acting like big babies. Remember that you're going to highlight examples of them acting like heroes in yellow and acting like big babies in green. In order to do that, you're just going to highlight whatever evidence you have. Click on this little highlight color button next to the A in your Google Doc, and then you can choose whichever color you want from there. Okay, so starting with the Stamp Act. The British felt like the colonists started the 7 Years' War, so they should pay more of the debt from the war. That makes sense, right? The British are like, dude, you guys started this. Like, you need to help pay this debt that we got into from going to war. They put a tax on certain items such as newspapers, almanacs, pamphlets, legal documents, dice, and playing cards. Riots broke out. Benjamin Franklin negotiated with the British to repeal the Stamp Act. All right, I'm going to go ahead and highlight this here in green. It totally makes sense why the British wanted to tax the colonists because they're like, you started this war, now we owe a lot of money because of the war, so you should help pay some of that money. All right. I'm also going to highlight this in yellow. Benjamin Franklin negotiated with the British to repeal the Stamp Act. That's a pretty heroic, honorable thing to do. He disagreed with it, and instead of responding violently, he responded peacefully to try to solve the problem. He was like, hey guys, we don't think this is fair. Could you please take away that Stamp Act? And it worked. Okay, so moving on, the Townshend Act. This act put a tax on goods that the Americans imported or bought from Great Britain. The colonists started to smuggle or illegally trade British goods as a way to get around this tax. Ooh, that seems like a little shady, right? Not very heroic, maybe acting a little bit like a big baby, doing illegal things to get around a rule. Even if you don't agree with the rule, you probably shouldn't be doing illegal things. The British, however, established a board of customs commissioners to stop smuggling and corruption among local officials in the colonies. They're like, not so fast. We're going to have these people check things to make sure nothing's illegally traded. Americans struck back by organizing a boycott or protest of British goods that were being taxed. Okay, so here they're doing a legal protest. That makes sense. That's a little bit more heroic. So we'll go ahead and highlight that in yellow. They're doing a legal protest. That's a little bit more honorable or heroic. Some began harassing the British customs commissioners. Ooh, that one's not quite as heroic, right? That's kind of acting like a big baby. They're picking on people who are just trying to do their jobs. These British custom commissioners, they don't have any control over it. They were hired to do a job and they're just trying to do their job, and these colonists are harassing them. The Boston Massacre. Tensions between the British and Americans were rising, especially in the colonial city of Boston. One late afternoon, when a disagreement between an apprentice wig maker and a British soldier led to a crowd of 200 colonists surrounding 7 British soldiers. So there was a disagreement between two people, one colonist and one soldier. And all of a sudden, there are now 200 colonists surrounding these 7 soldiers. Even if I was a soldier who had a gun, I might be a little scared with a group of 200 people, right, surrounding just me and 6 other people. When the Americans began taunting the British and throwing things at them, oh, that doesn't seem very hero-like, right? Taunting and throwing things at these soldiers when it was just a disagreement between a soldier and one other person. The soldiers began firing on the crowd. As the smoke cleared, 3 men, including an African American sailor named Crispus Attucks, were dead and 2 others were mortally wounded. Okay. Oops, I highlighted this in the wrong color. It wasn't a very heroic thing. This one should be highlighted in green. That was my bad. Okay. We could highlight this last part here. Even though it didn't start very heroic, it kind of ended heroic, right? These soldiers began firing into the crowd. They had guns. The colonists didn't necessarily have guns. And at the end, 3 people died standing up for what they thought was right. The Boston Tea Party. British took soldiers out of Boston. Okay, that makes sense after that whole Boston massacre, and repealed or canceled the Townshend Act. But the British left a tax on tea, and not just any tea, Dutch tea. There were two main tea companies back then, the British tea and the Dutch tea. The British taxed the Dutch tea to make it more expensive, and so the British tea would be cheaper for Americans, hoping more Americans would buy the British tea. Americans didn't like that so much. They didn't want to buy British tea, and they wanted the freedom to trade with other countries however they saw fit. All right, this part seems like maybe they're being big babies, right? They're like, we don't want to buy your tea because we disagree with your taxes, right? So we could go ahead and highlight that in green. But the second part, they wanted the freedom to trade with other countries however they saw fit. We could definitely highlight that in yellow. That's pretty honorable, right? Like, that's a really good reason not to want to buy that British tea. The Sons of Liberty disguised themselves and snuck on a British ship and dumped 92,000 pounds of British tea into the harbor. They made a point not to harm any of the crew aboard and even replaced a padlock when it was broken. That seems pretty heroic, right? That's really honorable. They didn't harm anybody. They wanted to make sure that they were there just to protest, so they didn't harm anybody. And they even replaced a padlock that they broke when they were doing this whole dumping the tea thing. Okay, so I'm going to highlight that in yellow. That's pretty heroic, pretty honorable. The Coercive Act and Quartering Act. The Coercive Act closed Boston Harbor until the destroyed tea was paid for and gave more power to the British military governor, General Thomas Gage, and less power to the colonists. Poor colonists? That's not fair. The Quartering Act allowed British soldiers to demand accommodations in unoccupied houses and buildings in town. What? Rather than having to stay out in the countryside. Colonists were not forced to board troops in their own homes, so they could be like in a barn or something like that. But they did have to pay for those soldiers' housing and feeding the soldiers. So, like keeping them warm, blankets, and food, of course. All right. So, we went through these notes and we highlighted all the examples of the founding fathers acting like big babies in green and acting like heroes in yellow. What you're going to do is you're going to go ahead and review all that stuff and make your own decision whether you think they were being heroes or big babies. And you'll just type your answer right down here where it says type your answer here. So you would just say big babies or heroes. Whichever one you decide, you're going to support your answer with 3 pieces of evidence or 3 examples. If this sounds scary, you've already done the hard work of identifying examples and evidence. So go ahead and look at the highlighted stuff in your notes. If you said that they were acting like big babies, you're just going to choose 3 of these green highlighted items. So, for example, they were acting like big babies because the British felt like the colonists started the 7-Year War, so they should pay more of the debt from the war. The colonists started to smuggle or illegally trade British goods as a way to get around this tax. Some began harassing the British customs commissioners. There. If you felt like the founding fathers were being heroic, you can go ahead and just choose 3 of these yellow highlighted items. So you could say Benjamin Franklin negotiated with the British to repeal the Stamp Act. They were being heroic because Americans struck back by organizing a boycott or protest of the British goods that were being taxed. Or you could say Americans wanted the freedom to trade with other countries how they saw fit. There you go. All right. If you have any questions or if you still need some help, message me on Schoology, email me, or you can always call or text that Google Voice phone number 304-853-0426. See you later.